Is this the real reason why Christianity is declining in the US? We've been able to see the real-time shift in the culture's engagement with Christianity, as highlighted in our previous video, with Obama seemingly shifting his tone and approach towards discussing Christianity publicly over the 8 years of his term.
My Christian faith then has been a sustaining force for me over these last few years.
These rituals remind us of the principles that we hold in common and Islam's role in advancing justice, progress, tolerance, and the dignity of all human beings.
And lest we get on our high horse and think this is unique to some other place, remember that during the Crusades and the Inquisition, people committed terrible deeds in the name of Christ.
But culture has gone much further than just a neutral worldview towards Christianity. In 2023, we saw Sam Smith's overtly demonic performance at the Grammys. And we've seen other celebrities take on demonic imagery, such as Lil Uzi Vert, Lil Nas X, Doja Cat, and Megan Fox.
Just a few drops, but yes, we do consume each other's blood on occasion for ritual purposes. He's much more haphazard and hectic and chaotic, where he's willing to just cut his chest open with broken glass and be like, take my soul, let me bleed on you. It doesn't not happen, let me tell you. Maybe not exactly like that, but a version of that has happened many times.
For ritualistic purposes only. And this shift highlights the flippant view towards Christianity and the spiritual realm today, causing your typical non-Satan worshiper to reject the worldview that they grew up in.
I used to be Christian, but now I'm cool. Surprisingly, some people try really hard to be both.
Side note, no one cool has ever uttered the words, "Now I'm cool." Now, what if I told you that the reason this shift is happening has nothing to do with celebrities influencing culture, any political figure leading the country, or even anti-religion groups such as the New Atheist? But before we get into that, guys, my name is Ruslan. This channel exists to encourage, empower, and inspire you to live a life that blesses God. So if you're new here, or if you're not new here, please make sure to hit the subscribe button. There's a huge percentage of the people that watch this channel, like 60% of y'all, unfortunately, are not subscribed. Also, do me a favor, hit the like as well, as YouTube tends to kind of suppress these sorts of videos in the algorithm. That really helps out a lot. Now, around this conversation of Christianity declining, oftentimes we think that this is a global trend. And the truth is, it's not. It's actually growing with respect to the population. It's growing faster than the population, okay? Christianity, according to this data here, is growing globally, with the number of Christians expected to increase to 2.63 billion between 2020 and 2024. This is a 1% growth, approximately 1% growth, which is faster than the 0.87% growth in the world's population. Now, where it is shrinking and declining is in North America and in Europe, places that are traditionally viewed as quote-unquote Christian nations. Very interesting. Now, the reasons for this is many, and we'll discuss those in this video, as well as a takeaway at the end that applies directly to you and I. But first, I want to give us a perspective that many people aren't thinking about when it comes to this conversation. As some of you guys may know, I am a faithful member at my local church, Rhythm Church, and last Sunday, my pastor gave an amazing message from part 2 in our series on Malachi, and he actually addresses some of the issues that are happening top down with regards to how God is being perceived in culture because of this specific reason, and it may shock you. Check this out. So this is from Rhythm Church's YouTube page. What is God worth to you? A sermon on Malachi chapter 1. This is part 2 in the series, and we're going to pick up at the 15-minute mark. Check this out.
We can't do it. But what he goes into, though, is he's blaming the people, but he's now blaming the priests. He's saying it's the priest's fault that the people are doing this. Why? Because the priests are allowing the people to do it. The priests are allowing the people to bring these lame and these blind and these injured animals. Basically, the priests are not holding up his truth, and because of that, it's now impacted the culture on a wide range.
Interesting. So he's specifically talking about Malachi, the priest, the Old Testament, that entire thing. But he's going to connect this to today with a quote that I think beautifully glues this together. Watch this.
A lot of what we're actually seeing today, even within our nation, is that the priests, aka the pastors, have not held up his word and his truth, and now we're starting to see it like reverberate throughout not only our nation, but culture, city, everything. And Charles Finney actually once said this: there is decay of conscience. The pulpit is responsible for it.
Oof.
If the public press lacks moral discernment, the pulpit is responsible for it. If the church is degenerate and worldly, the pulpit is responsible for it.
That's a lot of weight given to the pulpit. That's a lot of weight given to the role of the pastor and the person communicating from a Sunday morning context. But it makes sense. Why? Well, because in the Old Testament, it talks about how the children of Israel, if they're obedient, will be the head and not the tail. They will lead and not follow. And I think that extends to us today in society. So Pastor Jeff, my pastor, is making the point that a lot of what we're seeing, according to Charles Finley, is because pastors aren't always speaking the truth when it's unpopular. Now, there's a twist coming here that I think you guys will appreciate, that it goes beyond just the pulpit. It actually involves us.
If the world loses its interest in Christianity, the pulpit is responsible for it. If Satan rules in our halls of legislation, the pulpit is responsible for it. If our politics become so corrupt that the very foundation of our government are ready to fall away, the pulpit is responsible for it.
Now, what do you guys think? Do you agree with that? Do you guys feel like the pulpit is responsible for it? Do you feel like the fact that we don't have more people speaking truth, by the way, regardless of your political ideologies, is this something that you think is truth? And I mean, how spot on is that last part? The very foundations of our government are ready to fall away. The pulpit is responsible for it. I mean, that's very chilling words that I think are very relevant today that Charles Finney said long time ago.
And why is because the pulpit, aka the platform, aka the preacher, can very easily lead people astray. And even today, there's actually a lot of people out there preaching heresy or allowing heresy, and it's leading people away. Matthew 18, Jesus says, Matthew 18, verse 7, he says, "Woe to the world because of the things that are causing people to stumble. Such things must come, but woe to the person through whom they come."
That's interesting. Woe to the world because of the things that cause people to stumble. So there's a degree of responsibility that the church and church leaders hold in terms of what's happening, according to Jesus, and woe to those that cause it. So you might be watching this being like, okay, great. Yeah, the pastors, they need to fix it. The churches, they're not doing enough. They're not feeding the homeless. They're not caring for the widows. They're not caring for the orphans. Church, bad. That's why I don't go to church. Well, hold on a minute, because this next point that Pastor Jeff makes is even more confrontational, and it reminds us that we have a role to play in this as well, and this might trigger some of you guys.
Like a lot of times we get into this because like we want to help people, and then when people criticize us, we don't know what to do with ourselves. You were mean. Like I'm telling you. And we do. And now, but part of that too is that because we don't like to be held accountable by our pastors. If we're on, like we don't like to be held accountable by our pastors. Like I have pastors in my life. Your pastor has a pastor or pastors. I got overseers. I got people that will hold me, but we don't like to be held accountable. So anytime a pastor leader in the church will hold you accountable, you'll just leave and go to this other church down the street.
Sheesh. Or just go to Bedside Baptist. I'm not going to go to a church anymore because they're just too judgy. They're too judgy. So it's interesting that there's this juxtaposition that's happening here. From one perspective, my pastor's saying that some of the preaching has gotten watered down. Pastors are afraid to speak the truth when it's unpopular. But the flip side of this is that a lot of people don't want to be held accountable today. A lot of people say, oh, you know, this is church hurt if a pastor tells you the truth about you living in sin or has to confront you, has to redirect you. And so there's this tension here. But what I love about this talk is he gets to a very practical place on what this means for you and I. We're going to play this, and I'm going to look at another passage a little bit later to drive home this point even more. Check this out. What he's about to do in this clip is highlight how we're under a different covenant and how for us it looks different than the offerings and the sacrifices that they used to have to make in the book of Malachi and in the old covenant.
For I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will.
Amen.
So we're to offer our bodies, our whole selves, and we're to do so in view of his mercy, not to earn his mercy.
Woo! Now, question number one is, are you offering your whole self to God as a living sacrifice? Question number two, are you doing it in view of his mercy, not because you're trying to earn his mercy? We're not
like, oh, here, I'm a living sacrifice for you so that I will be acceptable to you, so that I will like get mercy from you. No, it's in view of his mercy. It's looking back at everything that he's done in our lives. It's like, that's why I think it's so important for you to remember what God saved you from, or what God delivered you from, or what God has done in your life, the great mercy that you've experienced, because that's where we live as living sacrifices from.
Oh gosh, that is so good. And I love the fact that he drives home the point that we need to remember what God has brought us from. We see this all over the scriptures. God is reminding the children of Israel, I'm the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I brought you out of the promised land. And I think the issue for many of us today, and why we grow weary and grow in despair, is we just forget. We pray for stuff. We throw up these Hail Mary prayers. We forget what we prayed about. And that's why we designed our Bless God prayer journal. We have this in black and tan. And this is a system that I've personally been using for decades for me to write out my own prayers, because when you write something down, it goes into a different part of your brain when you're writing with your hand. It helps you recall it, and you document the things you've been praying for. So if you don't have a Bless God prayer journal, go to blessgod.shop, pick yours up now. I promise you, if you fill one of these up and just document your prayers, you'll be shocked how many of the things you're praying to God for, he actually answers. Okay, but let's get back to Pastor Jeff.
The Israelites here had forgotten that they had been delivered from bondage and captivity. So it then allowed them to treat the Lord as plain and as basic and as less than, as opposed to when they first came back and they were excited and they were worshiping him and they were rebuilding the temple and they were serving him. I think sometimes we need to remember we have to live in the view of his mercy.
That's right.
Of who I was before the Lord and what was going on in my life and how empty I felt and what a jerk I was, and then finding the Lord and like learning faith and learning that he loves me and that I've got an identity in him. It's in view of his mercy, of what he's done in our life, that when my wife was 14 weeks pregnant with our second child and all of a sudden she developed appendicitis and we didn't know what was going on, and we're sitting there in an emergency room where they've stuck us in a room and forgot about us. And I go to doctor after doctor after doctor, and we have to sign a document saying that if we do the surgery, you might lose your child.
Sheesh.
So it's either might lose your child or lose both your lives. What do you want? And we have to sign a paper, and I have to pray like crazy. And I have to ask the Lord, mercy. And we have a beautiful Isla Joy now today because of, like, the Lord saved her. It was funny when the doctor comes back to me. He's like, so there was a small perforation within the appendix, AKA it had ruptured because he had lasted so long. She spent weeks in the hospital. But God's mercy the whole time of that she's alive, my baby's alive.
Okay, wow, I got choked up even watching that back, and I've heard this talk multiple times. I love the fact that he was able to kind of weave in a story like that, and the thing is, I think we all have stories like that, right? Maybe not of crazy situations where you could potentially lose a child, but we all have things like that we probably need to do a better job of just remembering God's mercy and God's goodness over our lives. Now, in a moment, we're going to go to a passage of scripture that I think is going to challenge all of us in a good way, though. But before we get into that, let me play you guys one more clip from this conversation with Pastor Jeff that I think absolutely captures the entire point of what he's trying to get across here. Check this out. This is from the 38-minute timestamp.
Part of his problem, God's problem here, is them not showing him honor and reverence by the offerings they brought, is that what it was communicating to the nations around them.
Their improper offering to God was communicating something to the nations around them, to the non-Jewish folks around them, okay? Listen closely.
What they were showing of the Lord was not true of the Lord. See, Israel was supposed to be the ones which God would use to bring his great kingdom, and the priests in here were part of the ones that they led in preserving tradition and knowledge and truth, and to show his greatness to people. Well, why is this so important for us today? Because we have to think about, what are we communicating to the surrounding culture? We
have to ask, what are our lives today? We are called to live as living sacrifice according to Romans chapter 12, verse 1 and 2. And so the question is, what are our lives communicating to the surrounding culture? Now check this passage out. I'm personally going through the book of 1 Peter. And 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 12 says, live such good lives among the pagans. These are folks that don't know God. That though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day he visits us. We, as followers of Jesus, are called to live lives that are so good among those who don't know him that through our lives, they will glorify God. They will see our lives and our lives will point to him. So sometimes people be like, oh, preach the gospel when necessary, use words. No. We got to use words to preach the gospel. But we also have to live lives that are indicative of the gospel. It's an and both. And so why is Christianity declining in America today? Is it perhaps because we have a top-down issue of what is and isn't being preached from the pulpit, and we have an accountability and a submission issue amongst churchgoers, whether they're checking out and doing bedside Baptist, whether they're not practicing their faith at all but claiming Jesus in name only, or whatever it is, there's a disconnect between the things we're supposed to represent and the lives we're supposed to lead amongst those who don't know Jesus, and what Christianity has kind of became known for in the West. Now, if you want to hear the first video where we highlighted Pastor Jeff's talk on the shift in culture, we'll have this pinned up over here. We'll also have his full sermon pinned up over here. And if you want to pick up one of our Bless God prayer journals, they're available now at blessgod.shop on sale right now. I'll see you over there. All right? Peace.